if you have free trade, so-called free trade, or you have globalisation, things will be moved and produced by the lowest common denominator. So if someone's making something or loading a ship cheaper than someone else, then that's got to flow across the world. It's got to be, it's got to push everything down, living standards, wages, conditions of all sorts of workers. They've got to be pushed down to whatever the lowest is anywhere in the world. Otherwise, big business can't compete.
On April 7th, 1998, Chris Corrigan, the boss of Patrick's stevedores, in cohorts with the Howard government, unleashed a new phase of their plan to destroy the Maritime Union of Australia.
Part of history tonight, mate. You're a part of history. Yeah. Sold out, years of struggle. Yeah. Years of struggle. Sold out for a couple of lousy dollars.
1,400 full-time workers at Patrick's, all members of the MUA, were locked out, and a non-union, or Scab workforce, recruited from the military and the National Farmers Federation, trained by Patrick's, were brought in.
Unbelievable.
Show a bit of backbone and walk out!
Your neck's going to get sore looking over your shoulder.
Go brainwashing!
Everywhere you go, you look behind something.
Show some principle! Tell them that you're Australian! Some backbone! And walk out! Not one of you has got any backbone! No principles! No nothing!
I don't think that was fair how they just kicked them all out like that.
Well, as the dispute unfolded, the public support grew and grew.
Standing by each other, and it's about the good things in this life. It's about holding your head high in a job and not walking around with your hands in your pants and, shuffling your feet every time a boss comes up to you.
It was critical, and it was a rare dispute, I guess, in Australian history where the majority of the picket lines weren't manned, manned's probably not is a bit sexist, but weren't attended by workers who were actually on strike. In the main, they were attended by supporters, by people that cared about the rights of people to have a trade union.
The most touching part of this whole setup that I saw was an old bloke pulled up there before we had a fence. The first night we moved into here, and we were blown everywhere. Well, he hobbled over on a walking stick with his wife helping him, and I said, "Come on, you want a cup of tea or a drink or something, old mate?" And he couldn't hardly hear or talk, but he said, his wife was telling me that he's an old waterside worker, and she said all he wants to do is make a donation. Well, I had to prise his fingers open, and there was $5, and it really, really touched my heart. I thought, my God, the conditions that I fought for are nothing compared to what he did, and what this government's done now to bust it, it's just not on. I mean, I cried. I done a donation, and I thought that's nothing compared to what these people have done. And really, it really made me cry.
The overriding mindset and all officials from all sides was to get the blokes back in the game.
And I have my house on the market, so
That's been pretty tough.
well, I don't think you can get any tougher.
As the workers waited outside the gates, the dispute moved through the courts, where the political complexity of the Patrick's conspiracy was revealed. Months earlier, Chris Corrigan had shifted all the funds out of Patrick's, making it technically insolvent. Knowing it is illegal under corporations' law to trade while insolvent, Chris Corrigan believed the courts would close the company down. The workers' jobs, wages and entitlements would go down with it.
There was this thing coming on, MUA's here to stay. But that's not what the kids said at school. And she was really upset about it, that Dad was fighting for his job, but these kids were saying horrible things that their parents had told them, and she couldn't work out why. Because their parents were telling them, you know, that wolfies are bludgers and wolfies don't do anything, and a few explicit words, that she couldn't understand it.
And we're here to stay! And we're here to stay!
You're back again, eh? You just really like railway.
I've got a fetish for them.
Two weeks after the lockout, as community supporters rallied behind the sacked workers, the federal court met to deliver its verdict on the MUA Patrick's case.
Says the federal court in Melbourne has ordered the reinstatement of Patrick Stevedore's 1,400 waterfront workers.
There is also evidence that the Patrick owners and other owners in the Patrick group, together with others, agreed on these unlawful acts as part of an overall plan to replace the workforce with non-union labour. This means that there is an arguable case that Patrick owners and Patrick employers have engaged in an unlawful conspiracy. Justice North, Federal Court.
I think the legal fight that they mounted was absolutely vital, and I think it was a really important part of a successful defence. And the reason I say that is that Corrigan and the government, who are clearly in day-to-day and strategic concert, I mean they were clearly working together, used the mechanism of sacking effectively the workers at Patrick's and re-employing them on bogus shelf companies and severing the employment relationship.
This group of 4,500 longshore workers in Los Angeles simply said that they had had a gutful of the casualisation of dock workers, of deunionisation of dock workers, and that they were going to make their stand with the Columbus, Canada, and they were not going to see scab cargo that had been loaded in Australia discharged in the port of Los Angeles. And that sent reverberations right throughout the shipping industry, right around the world. And in my opinion, their noble actions played such a pivotal role.
We very strongly feel that the maritime dispute is a turning point in Australia's industrial history, that we're seeing at the moment a mobilisation of the working class in Australia, which was shown in Melbourne the other night. There's the possibility that this could be won.
The business of the court is legality. Just as it is not unknown in human affairs.
And everyone's got the sense that it could be won, and they're filled with a new spirit. And I think what Reith and Corrigan have probably succeeded in doing is reigniting the class struggle in Australia, which was put to sleep for 15 years under the Labor government. The unions have lost their spirit and their will to fight, and now we're seeing it revived again, and the possibility of a major, well, I'm not saying they're going to win it easily, but there's definitely a fight on, and the rank and file is coming out and supporting MUA, and they're seeing this as a decisive issue.
That have dominated the media during the last couple of weeks. They're Lest it be thought our approach upholds anachronisms, it is worth observing that the law lying at the heart of this case is not some long-standing and outdated rule, but federal legislation enacted as recently as 1996 under the auspices of the present government.
The ironic twist was that the government's Freedom of Association clause in its own Workplace Relations Act actually backfired in favour of the union. This clause was meant to encourage workers to not join or belong to a union, but was used by the court to support the right of workers to not be discriminated against if they did belong to a union.
Discourteous to anybody if we confine our comments.
Workers were apprehensive. Some workers were sceptical about the court's pivotal role in the dispute and its ability to compromise more traditional forms of direct action.
And carefully considered the whole of Justice North's reasons for judgment, but we find them free from appellable error.
This union and the two unions that make up this union were born out of struggle, were born out of hardship, were born out of, when men had to carry 200 pounds on their back, when seamen had to live 15 in the cabin up forward with no conditions, and wharfies were died of asbestosis and mistreatment when they were lined up at the gates and picked by the boss. When seamen had no corner, no engagement system, they were singled out, and the ones with the strongest back got a job. These are the things that built this union, and we'll never forget it. And the same as what we've probably not only learnt from history in this struggle, but we've in fact created our own history for the future.
What it actually was an ideological dispute, an attempt to smash trade unionism in Australia. If they had succeeded in completely smashing the MUA, they would have then immediately turned to other unions, probably such as the construction, mining, forestry union, or any other union that appeared to have some strength. They would have immediately turned to them.
On May the 4th, 1998, the full bench of the High Court upheld the earlier decision of the Federal Court ordering the complete reinstatement of the MUA workers on certain conditions. The MUA workers would work unpaid under administrators till Patrick's was viable.
It's very surprising, actually. He's not one of the delegates, and he's not one of the ones you would expect to be on the hit list. So they've just not let him in just to be confrontational by the looks of this.
Right. I thought 1400 were going back. Refused. Security said get out.
Locked him away super rude and tell him he's not starting.
And I thought the orders were 1400 to be reinstated, not 1399.
I think in the Port of Brisbane there were 10 workers still with, they're blacklisted, held outside the fence, and with apprehended violence orders against them. And some of those charges were absolutely fabricated. They were totally false. But these people weren't allowed to come inside the gate, so it put a lot of stress on them and their families, and it was a lesson to other workers. Don't stick your head up, don't even look sideways at a boss, or you'll find yourself with an apprehended violence order against you and you'll be put outside the gate. When we came back, every piece of paper and every notebook with all the phone numbers of all the agents and trucking companies and everyone we had to talk to had been ripped off the walls and taken.
The court's ordered that we start and finish in the same shift rosters that we had before we were locked out.
And all the records of what had happened while we'd been locked out, of what cargo was for what ship, that was all taken and hidden from us.
We have got 2.5 weeks to comply with viability of this port and of course nationally. And I dare say all these hurdles they're making in this establishment here in Maritime in Brisbane, I dare say all over Australia will be the same.
In the deed of settlement reached between Patrick's and the MUA, the union had to agree to drop conspiracy charges against Patrick's stevedores in order for the workers to have access to their entitlements and to the redundancy funds. A vital legal opportunity that would call on documents revealing the conspiracy of the Howard government and Patrick's to the general public was lost. A few weeks later, the MUA held stop-work meetings around the country to endorse Patrick's new enterprise bargaining agreement.
And as we enter a campaign now for the upcoming federal election, you'll see quite clearly that Peter Reith is now using as part of their platform a second wave of industrial relations reform.
Recently tied us up in knots, you know, and if we'd have broken those arbitration laws, you'd get away with it for a while, but within time you would actually probably break the union financially, and then you can't do anything.
This was not a normal enterprise agreement negotiation. It was not. It was born of the situation that was inflicted on us by the Patrick's group of companies and Chris Corrigan, starting in September of last year with the corporate scam he put in place. We found ourselves in a position where we had to reach a negotiated settlement in this dispute. We did all the hard work. We did all the hard work on the picket line, all around the country, to get back in the gate. That was our first goal, get back in the gate. And that's what we did. And I can tell you, the leaders of this union over many, many years have you all looking at us now, and if we ended up back out the gate, they'd say, what in the bloody hell are you doing? What in the bloody hell are you doing? There is no way you can win a dispute out the gate.
I was talking to an old fella the other day, happened to be your old man. He said to me they finally got you right back to that far right swing of the pendulum, back to where you were 100 years ago. Hopefully the Christ it ain't going to take us 100 years to get anywhere near like back where we were. But if we pull together, it'll be a lot easier road. You're talking about equity in the pick and that. You might remember one of the great fathers of our union, Jim Healy, when they had the Burt system going. The reason they got around that, one fella getting 5 days a week and the other fella getting nothing, was by pulling together. Don't step up to the first line if you had a day's work yesterday. Let your mate beside you have a go. Think of the bloke beside you.
Paul is a fighter, but then again you're talking about a wolfie's son. That's a wolfie. And Paul's father, he won't take intimidation. And neither will Paul, and neither will I.
What should have been called for was a general strike to paralyse the employers and paralyse the government, to show the weakness of the government.
A national strike at that moment wouldn't have been successful. I don't think we would have had thousands of people out. And that we never know the truth because we never can run that scenario again. But I think the risks of it were very real for creating violent male images around an issue which was really about the future of employment conditions and fairness in the employment contract.
They'd have just said, oh, what do they want? What do these blokes want? We've supported with money, we've supported with a presence on the picket lines, we've supported with food. What do they want?
You can go down the toilet with the flag flying as a labour movement by taking traditional strike action.
You've got to think about it, whether the tactics, whether the strategy right from the start was the correct strategy. Is it the correct strategy these days for unions to go down the legal avenue? Or should we be taking a second look at the more traditional methods that we used in the past that got us the gains that we won? Because the courts are always going to be against us. If we stick to the courts and go down the legal avenue, we're always eventually going to hit that brick wall.
We had two options. One, get beat, or secondly, survive.
I urge people to vote in favour of the document.
We were going to be left in a position that would be impossible, which was what happened in the end. When the final offer was put to us, as horrendous as it was, there was nowhere for the workers to turn.
The new enterprise bargaining agreement introduced a range of workplace changes and losses in conditions.
They want to get rid of every permanent and they just have everybody sitting at home at their own beck and call. If you don't perform, you just won't get picked up. There's no worry about getting a sack. There's no worry about getting redundancy. They just won't pick you up. They'll starve you out. It's as simple as that.
700 full-time jobs were destroyed. When many workers left, generations of working class history left with them.
I took redundancy because I had some health problems arising out of doing 27 and a half years of shift work. I knew that I could not do compulsory 12-hour shifts at the employer's discretion. On the day I walked out of the wharf on a Friday, they didn't even tell us that we were finished that day. I couldn't say goodbye to my mates because I didn't know whether I'd be back on Monday. And I didn't know till Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, when a distraught local official rang me and said, "Mick, it's a disgrace. None of you have been told that you finished yesterday." He said, "They've just given me the names." He said, "I'm trying to catch everyone now and tell them." And when I walked out, I could feel that beside me was my father and both my grandfathers and my mother's only brother and three of my father's brothers, who were all waterside workers. The only one who's alive is my mother's brother, who's 86 now, 87. And the ghosts of all those old men was walking out with me, and I felt like I deserted what they fought. But I didn't see any alternative. 3 generations on both sides. But yeah, I know other men feel the same way. They feel in a similar position to me. They feel this sense of shame, I suppose, of being nothing. Probably hits us older blokes worse, I suppose, because we grew up in an era, a male chauvinistic era, where we were the men and we were the breadwinners, and you know, that's what made you a man, that you actually contributed the bulk of the money. I don't think myself that I failed. I did the best I could. It's just that you're useless now. That's the way you feel, that you're useless, totally useless. I mean, the cat catches rats and mice. What do I do?
How's that been going from working all your life then to being unemployed?
Well, it's hard, as I've never been unemployed, always worked all that period of time, and to also not be working, it's now got stress on the wife because I'm under her feet all the time. She feels that the breadwinner, I should be out, getting work.
Well, life after it is, I was sick for a long time after I resigned. I'd only come out of hospital about 3 or 4 days prior to my resignation, and I was sick for a very long time. Like, I withdrew into myself and questioned all those ideals and beliefs that I held. I used to hold so close to me. Life after it's been very difficult. Not many people are interested in employing a person with my outlook. So I've had to go into studying and all that sort of stuff. And I think out of the end of the whole disaster and the whole thing is that I've ended up a much nicer human being, but it's been at some cost.
I'm not going down the path of Prozac and Valium either. I know some people now, both at work and who have left, are in that trap of prescribed medication for their depression, and I just see that as a real trap. My wife said to me, my partner of 21 years said to me that she knew if I chucked the job in and came home, I'd go mad. If I stayed on the job, I'd die, and she'd rather have me home mad than dead at work.
There was an immediate recruitment of new workers employed as casuals.
Now the company can just put who they want, where they want, as many times as they want. Right?
As many shifts as they want to.
Yep. Yes. Yep. So you could have. Well, we had a case in point. I mean, you'd have some blokes here could work 5-6 days a week, and we had a woman up at the Maritime. She got 2 moorings for the week, which is 4 hours pay. where there should have been some sort of equalisation, each one should have got 3 days.
The biggest change was the amount of people that left the industry. They all have their good reasons, whatever, for going. So we had an influx of new members, and I'd call them members because currently everybody here, to my recollection, has signed up. They are a member of the union. But it's a bit like starting your first day of kindergarten. There's a lot of education goes with that. It's one thing to get a person to join the union, it's another thing to win their hearts and minds and get them to be active within the union.
Having to get 4 hours pay, for a week. You got to live on that.
You're employed as a casual. If they don't want you, they don't like the look of you or whatever else, you won't get picked up. And if there's no shipping around anyway, you'll starve.
You have now so few experienced workers on the wharves, there's just not enough to watch over all the new, fresh, young people coming in. And these fresh young people are coming in as casuals and are being driven into situations that are horrendously dangerous.
Before we had a first aid that picked up the shift, he's a designated person who was suitably attired and that people would easily recognise and responsible for the first aid equipment. And now, nothing.
They're racing into danger, oblivious to what they're doing, and there's not enough experienced heads there to say, hang on, 10 years ago this happened or 5 years ago this happened, so that's why we don't do it that way anymore.
Just recently, it was Labor Day. There was an ad where people could be upgraded to a GWE, which is a permanent part-time type position. Right beside that was who was prepared to work on Labor Day. So that competition is there. There's always a bit of a wedge being driven between people.
Because if they don't do it, they're not going to get picked up.
If workers don't feel that they're an integral part of the organisation, or if there's a breakdown between the rank and file and the union's leadership where there's an antagonism or there is a feeling that they will not be looked after, well, it creates a climate for an employer to wreak havoc with that workforce. And that's not just on the waterfront, that's everywhere.
We just haven't got the, what you say, the pull anymore to request like financial records and stuff like that.
They had security guards on the gates. You had to get right of entry permits through the Arbitration Commission to even go onto the premises.
I had a story on the email today about the murder of union officials in Colombia. They are frequently murdered in the Philippines. We're not murdered in Australia anymore, but there certainly are people who pay a big penalty, even for workplace activism.
Workers were extremely victimised in the last few years.
Oh, they have been. Say anyone who sort of said to be militant or stood up to the boss, especially the casuals, even though it was pretty hard to prove at the time, they weren't given an equal amount of work and stuff like that.
I hated 3 weeks of irregular, which could be midnights. We just can't wait for the new EBAs to come in. So hopefully the management will see that, this isn't a very good roster, and they should change it.
Those decisions really were in the hands of a small number of people, and no doubt that would cause heartburn to those in the long run who lost their jobs as a result of the dispute. But I think that is the reality of such a complex dispute where the employer is in concert with the government with a very clear and obvious, well-resourced capacity to smash the union.
I mean, 700 permanent jobs wins, and yet the national officials can still boast, that we protected jobs. They didn't protect jobs at all. You carry that through into Conos, probably 1,500 jobs are gone, permanent jobs.
Certainly if the union strategy had been different and more adventurous and called for a general strike and not had an intelligent and well-organised legal strategy, I think the workers would have been smashed, and I think the union would have been seriously affected. But what is more, and I think more important, is in the longer run, the possibility of collective organisation for workers more broadly would have really been set back a long way.
The unionised workforce in Australia is down to 1 in 4 now. The point is, how are they going to attack the problem? And unless it goes back to the shop floor, unless it goes back to the people on the job being empowered, that they can actually have some real influences on the changes of their lives, well, the downward trend of trade unionism in this country will continue. It's a very hierarchical, very bureaucratic trade union movement.
Waterside workers were very politically educated people, very wide-read, very internationalist, always willing to step in and risk their own jobs to help other workers. What creates militant unions and militant workers isn't that they're born with a militant spoon in their mouth. It's the fact that the conditions are so harsh and dangerous, like mining, like the wharves, like seafarers. The conditions are so harsh that for their very lives they have to fight to improve safety conditions, and out of that flows improved wages and improved living conditions.
In the Australian sort of spectrum, they were a union which was close to its members. Now, I think they, along with a lot of Australian unions, the Accord years meant that unions became more centralised, industrial strategy was more determined at the ACTU level.
What we were told with the Accords by our leadership nationally was that yes, we as waterside workers could go for a pay rise and could probably get it, but in the interests of those who were paid a lot less than us, we had to hold back to allow the money that we would have got to go to these people who weren't being paid as much as us, but it never happened. And also the theme of the waterside workers, particularly before the MUA amalgamation happened between the waterside workers and the seamen, the theme of the national leadership was this: we have to have profitable companies, and profitable companies will provide jobs. Well, you have profitable companies only by exploiting workers.
That's a double S at end one. Yeah, double S, all 40s.
As a result, the kind of sinews of unionism, membership activism, connection to issues that were really at the heart of people's concerns weakened. And I think that did mean that strategically that union and the ACTU more broadly, many unions, came into such a sort of hearts and minds struggle with a relatively weak connection to a lot of the members.
You centralise your union structure in, say, Sydney, and you make that the national office will deal with all the problems of the union in the main. What happens is that the branch structure will be disempowered in the branch, in the elected leaders of the branch, but much more importantly than that, it disempowers the rank and file. And it also creates a condition where a branch can blame all the problems it's having on the national body, and the national body can blame all of its problems that it has upon the branches not doing the work.
You can name and put your finger on a bunch of officials who have taken a road which has cost their families money, it's affected their health, you know, they've been committed to a task which has been difficult. At the same time, we've had a bunch of seat warmers.
There's many very principled people, but some you feel that they're on an expressway to the upper middle class, and you have to worry about when people start thinking more of the car they're driving or the private schools they're sending their kids to, and how big their next home's going to be, rather than what sort of life their membership is living.
To me, what the union is the rank and file. It's not the full-time employees who are the officials, and that's what they are. They're employees of the union. It's not the union buildings or the cars or the mobile phones. It's the rank and file. And what makes a union strong is that the whole-scale participation of the rank and file in determining policy and where the union's going through democratic decision-making process in meetings. It's an awkward and cumbersome way of doing it, but the more informed and the more involved the rank and file is, the stronger the union is. What's happened in the MUA, and I presume in other unions as well, is that the union has been hijacked by a small middle class, in a way, minority, who consider themselves to be the union and the rank and file to be like clients or customers of them.
If you start thinking that you're the top dog, or you're this and you're that, you're a genius. It creates this idea that you're the person who is the strength of the organisation, when the strength of any union or any organisation like a union is within its rank and file.
Any union can be broken. It all depends on how strong the union is. And I feel that the Waterfront Union and the Miners Union and all the other unions around are as strong as the people that make them strong.
Democracy within an organisation should never be a facade. It should be something that's an utterly integral part of it, and that's one of the reasons why I talk so passionately about rotational leadership in unions where it's possible, and in branches in particular of unions.
That is a really interesting question about what are the possible mechanisms for democratic organisations to keep democratic. How do we avoid leaders and representatives being sucked into mindsets which are other than representing the interests of those they are elected to represent? And Jack Mundy, in his leadership of the Builders Labourers Federation, was committed to, for example, to the rotation of leadership. And that story is kind of salutary when he left the leadership of the BLF and took his experience with him. The BLF was unable to withstand a very significant assault from right-wing unionism, and we lost a really important union. So I think there are some very tough questions around the issue of cycling leadership. I mean, I'm in favour of it. I think it makes a heap of sense, but it is actually quite expensive in terms of losing leadership and experience.
See, the old fellas, they used to come back as casual, and they kept it going, the union and
the spirit of the place.
Spirit, yeah, the old neighbour, and had old nicknames and stuff like that. And it sort of went on that you could talk to an old fellow and get a bit of background on certain issues like the maritime orders and that. But not everyone was au fait with them, and what would happen is you could always call on someone always had the Bible in their, the maritime 32 or something, always had it in their locker, or the award and stuff like that. But nowadays people just live by the sword. That if the boss says jump, they say, how high do you want me to jump?
I think the opportunity of coming out of that dispute, given the political economy location of it and the determination of a strong Conservative government and very militant bosses, I think it was a campaign that had to be fought on several fronts and was reasonably unlikely to come up with a big win for the workers. And in the long-term winner of the dispute, in straightforward monetary and material terms, is Chris Corrigan. His shares are now very much higher than they were at the time of the dispute.
12 workers from Patrick's were able to transfer to Sealand, which was later sold to CSX World Terminals.
Well, during the dispute, I had to sell the house, and I needed to keep working. I had a daughter to support, so life at Patrick's after the dispute wasn't very pleasurable. Fortunately enough, got a job at Sealand. Well, Sealand was good. I really enjoyed working there. Yeah. It was like starting a new life.
Then you were sick pretty recently, eh? What happened there with the workers?
They all pitched in every week. They dug into their pockets and helped us keep our home and kept the family fed. It was brilliant. They did it for 3 months.
That's amazing. And you hadn't been working there that long either, really, had you?
No, a bit over a year, and a year and a bit, and they all dug in their pockets every week, and it just saved our necks.
In 2001, employees at CSX World Terminals Brisbane achieved the highest productivity in stevedoring in Australia. Barely a week after the workers were congratulated for the great job they were doing, the entire CSX World Terminals workforce is called into an urgent meeting with national boss Grant Gilfillan and MUA officials.
CSX World Terminal is a journey with a world-class operation. If you are ready for a challenging and rewarding career, consider CSX World Terminal. Well, there's a few of us here that have, and look, it's just about to happen.
Haven't we met before somewhere? I mean, during the dispute in '98 at Patrick's and...
Yeah, through the Patrick's dispute 3 years ago. We were locked out.
Yeah.
That's when we met.
And now you took a job at Sealand, and,
Yes.
and why did you do that?
Because I thought I wasn't going to sell my job, take redundancy, and I came here for a permanent job.
They're a bit late, so if you can just get these blokes just so you can know, if you want to ask any questions, I think the human resources of people here. This other end. Pete Luption, is he there, Pete? Brad Johnston, is there Brad? Paul Hodgkins? Dallas Whaleman? Paul Carnegie? Dave Coates? Scotty Butterworth?
Grant Gilfillan told the workers that CSX World Terminals Brisbane had been bought out by Patrick's boss Chris Corrigan. Corrigan wanted the machinery, the berth and other assets, but the 80 workers would no longer be required.
Doing it ourselves? I know it's fucking, maybe it's pie in the sky, but shit. Fuck, we're all in the same boat, we're all out of a job.
They didn't take the workers on at all. I think it's a bit selfish and unfair.
It should be every union, Australia-wide, completely go out on strike and just make one big scenario of the whole situation and get the people, not just as individuals. It's got to be everybody. It can't be a little one-off situation, just one union. That's got nothing to do with it. You got to stop the country. You got to stop the country for a month.
Collectively.
Yeah, collectively. It's got to be done.
So here we are working our best to make it the best productive terminal in Australia, which is already documented in the shipping magazines. Trying to save a shipping line, which it eventually happened, and all the while they're making plans to sell it out from under us. So we were all totally betrayed and deceived.
The 40 or so casuals we had here, they are surviving from their pay packet from 1 week to the next. They have to ring up every day of the week to try and find out if they've got work. Now, if that's not stress, I don't know what is.
They're going to generate a society here of, as we were saying earlier, that it's going to increase the crime rate as they putting people out of work and putting them on the poverty line just to survive or help their family survive.
They're all hurting inside. Everyone is. And they need to be heard. Same in the Patrick's dispute. The entire workforce. So here we go again. You go to work to earn a living. That's the bottom line. You go to work to earn a living. And if it's next week, or a month, or even 2 months, can't accept it.
No final date was given to the workers. Many hoped that they would be able to get work at either Patrick's or P&O in Brisbane.
Orders for Monday the 3rd of September required for 7 a.m. McNally's the foreman, Hodgkins, Waller, Farrelly, Mendola, Lester Murphy, Monty and Newland is the clerk. All that labour required evening shift commencing at 14:30. And that is the end of the orders. Just another thing, those permanents who haven't notified the union of their preference to transfer, please do so immediately.
Well, we've been here 3 years and that sign will change 3 times now.
Yeah, it was Sealand, eh?
Sealand originally, CSX and Langcorp or Patrick's.
Shows the general atmosphere.
Yeah, it does. Shows the feeling.
I reckon it's bad for all families. Like, just trying to make a living and... Yeah.
Happy Father's Day.
No one sort of understands that people are out there that are hurting, and there's a lot of people hurting. You just keep getting knocked down and knocked down. A person that does a good day's work doesn't mean that he's going to go ahead in his life. Once upon a time, if you're a good worker, you know, you've got the results, but it doesn't mean shit now.
Can you give us a few more numbers, mate?
239100.
There's just, in a casual workforce, in any union, you just got nowhere to stand no more. You can't, and it's just the way it's going. It's all changed to what it used to be. Everybody was under the same roof, that was the expression. Now we've got so many different roofs that it's difficult. Divide and conquer, as they say.
No, permanent people and permanent jobs that get a redundancy, but we get nothing. So we've been doing the same job, but we walk off without a cent. So basically, yeah, we've got nothing to fall back onto. So.
How do you feel when you drive past Patrick?
Well, there's an uneasy feeling in the stomach.
You might have that feeling when you drive past CSF.
Well, I don't think I'll be coming down here too often.
But it's just like having your guts ripped out, isn't it? I mean, we were the best crew in the country, weren't we? Really, we were the most productive port in the country. Terminal, anyway. And they shit on us. So I'm pretty dirty. My attitude's gone, and I don't give a fuck, to be honest, anymore.
I haven't lost faith in the industry, but it's hard to have faith in big companies like that, the way they treat people. That's the hardest thing to cope with.
But out of the 80 workers, only 8 casuals were taken by P&O. 3 workers were able to transfer to CSX in Adelaide.
Yeah, Mum's been pretty worried that the family might split up and those matters, and going down to Adelaide and stuff like that.
So she didn't want to go?
No, she didn't want to go. I don't want to go either.
Well, now I'm going back to Adelaide for the working again for CSX. Hopefully it's a long term.
Australia's wharves is hanging in the balance after maritime union members voted today on an enterprise bargaining agreement. The deal, negotiated with the union's former archenemy Patrick Stevedores, has the backing of MUA officials and would build on the reforms delivered 3 years ago after a dramatic and violent power struggle that has left many residues of bitterness.
We don't know who's going to be made permanent part-time. I don't know whether I am. Otherwise, I'm still stuck with 1 day a week, and which is less than 8 hours or less in a week, and you can't live on 8 hours.
Employees are far more happy today when they've got real jobs to do than they were 3 years ago when they were cowering away in the mess room or whatever. You're trying to avoid being seen.
Patrick's took 3 workers and immediately began converting the CSX berth using automated robotics for cargo handling that aimed to replace workers with machines. Meanwhile, the trend in retrenchment and casualisation continue to impact on workers all over the world.
It seems to be going in the direction that bosses get even more power and the workers are suppressed.
The trouble with management, I think, these days is instead of treating their workforce as an asset, they treat them as a liability. People who are making the money for them, they're treating as a liability.
When you're 49 years of age, they can't say it, but they don't really want to see you anymore. And when you've had 20 years on the wharf, you're tagged militant. You know, you've been in a militant union and stuff like that, and we don't need you rocking the boat. Can't say that, but they can only work it out by looking at your resume and stuff like that. They know you've come from a very, very volatile area.
I have no real bad memories of my life as a rank and file worker under the hook on the wharf. There's some rough times and awkward times, and times that I probably at the time wished they'd gone some other way, but no, I'm proud to have been a wharfian. I wouldn't know how to put into words my gratitude to the old workers particularly, who spent their time teaching a somewhat impatient young man some patience and some principles and ethics, morals, and all the things that the present ruling faction lack.
And everyone has to stick together, whether you have Joe Blow next door saying, you know, wharfies or miners or anyone else don't do anything. It doesn't matter, we're all Australians.
We're affected, and our kids are affected by the outcome of that dispute in the long run, and certainly the people whose jobs were lost must feel very sorry that they don't know all of the things that Peter Reith did, and all of the meetings that he had with Corrigan, and all of the events that led up to the dispute. But I think it's unlikely now that we will hear all of that detail.
To a degree, a country's liberties are determined in an industrial world by the strength of their unions, and to see the union movement in this country become a marginal force is something that's, I might think from a personal experience, is sad, but is actually dangerous for our continued civil liberties and dangerous for our for the intellectual and moral and physical wealth of the country.
The system I own, gotta rake it all in, and I'm gone. Never touch me, build my own empire. Buy a little justice, a little justice to buy. Happy as a bell.